Another thing I can't. Another thing that's so actually the best. I was hoping Courtney would be here because I didn't want to get out. Heard the lawsuit, you know. No, all that whirling. Yeah, that's right. Too dangerous. I was like, please. Yeah. No, 25 miles. Everybody. Yeah, right. Oh. Both the good. It should be more informative. All right. Another week. I'm thinking better. Yeah. A lot more than I used to. Every time I do it painful? Sure. It can be. Yeah. I mean, sitting here right now, it's not. If I turn it the wrong way, yeah. It's getting better though. We have a quorum. We have a quorum. At this time, we'll call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda. Approval. Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Agenda is approved. Now entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Approval. Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. At this time, we would allow for public comment. If there's anybody wishing to speak at this time, would be in order. Hearing none, go ahead and move on. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Okay. Is there a second? A second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Consent item is approved.
I did have one point. If you can go back to that real quick. Sure. That doesn't affect your vote just now. I just want you to know we got a water trails change order this afternoon. And it's something that they probably need done before we begin in September. So if there's no objection, that's something we could have the executive committee take up, and then the policy committee could affirm that action at their next meeting, but that gives them to go ahead to get that change order process so we can pay contractors and not hold up the project. Is anybody opposed to that?
Hearing no objection, so ordered. We'll move on to item number 6, presentation on the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau updates. Allison?
Yes, thank you. So in June, we had an outline about safety within the Edgefield area. And one of the things that came out of that is engaging with some of our state partners and other people working, agencies working in the space of safety. And so we've invited the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau here to present today and give a kind of high level overview. So I'll introduce Brett Jeffkeys and let him take the floor. There's Dave.
Brett. Thank you. Thank you, Allison, and thanks for having me here. My name is Brett Jeffkeys, and I'm the Bureau Chief of the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. My background is I've been in the Department of Public Safety since 1987. Anymore when I say that around the Department of Public Safety, I know where I'm at. But anyways, pretty young department. Our mission is to identify traffic safety problems and through partnerships, the city, county, and state agencies develop and implement traffic safety programs to reduce death and injury on highways, roadways. We work with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. We administer state's allocation of federal funds for traffic safety projects focused on driver behavior, road user behavior. So this is their mission statement. This is a map of a state highway safety office. So we are the state's highway safety office. Each state has one. We happen to be in the Department of Public Safety, but a lot of highway safety offices are also in Department of Transportation's, Homeland Security. There's a couple in state police agencies, but every state has a highway safety office, and we are Iowa's. This is our organizational chart. The governor appoints um, um, Steve Baines currently is Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, who selects or hires me to be the bureau chief of the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. This is the staff below me, and what we primarily do is grants management. And so there's a lot of funding with that, but also recognizing that partners are very important to make sure that our traffic safety projects are effective and efficient as possible. And so we have program managers, we have an administrative assistant, evaluator. We have a lot of reports and justifications with that federal taxpayer dollars. So as far as states go, there's a strategic highway safety plan. We're over on the left. We are the behavioral side, dealing with road user behavior, trying to influence road users to be safer when they travel on the road. The middle one is commercial vehicle safety plans, so commercial motor vehicles that primarily the enforcement is the Iowa State Patrol's commercial motor vehicle unit. And then over on the right side is more infrastructure related with highway safety improvement plan through the Iowa DOT. I looked a little bit through the Des Moines MPO's safety action plan a little bit yesterday and today, trying to digest a little bit of that. So I know that it seems like everybody's familiar with the safe system approach. I will say that the federal administration just came out with a new safety action plan called Pathways to Safer Streets. I don't know if that's something that's kind of surfaced to Des Moines MPO yet. But we really have embraced the safe system approach. And I think we've seen that in the last couple of years where we understand that we're all part of the bigger system. I think with the passage of the hands-free law last year, from our side, we wanted to think that was everything, that was everything. But we understand also there's been a lot of infrastructure improvements with rumble strips, center line, edge of roadway, or less conflicted intersections, and a lot of the other enhancements that have really contributed to this as well as safer vehicles. And so, while we want to think that hands-free did it all, there's just a bigger system at play, and we understand that. So in the circle, safe road users is squarely where we're at with our programs, safer speeds as well. We're trying to influence people to drive safer. It's a difficult thing. People tend to not believe that it's dangerous to drive faster. I think that probably is indicative of at least the speed limit going up on 2-lane rural roadways, 55 to 60. All studies show there will be an adverse effect on crashes and fatalities by raising that speed limit. Nonetheless, here we are. So with this roadway safety strategy, I think we can all agree, death and serious injuries are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes; they're vulnerable. The responsibility is shared, and we really appreciate that. When the safe system approach came out, we really embraced it because we understand that it's not just all enforcement; it's not all messaging and education. There has to be these other components in place, and we have to have that redundancy. So, like I said, primarily through our office, very heavy in the grants management. There's a lot of oversight, a lot of monitoring, review by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. We currently have 203 grant-funded projects across the state. We annually award between $10 to $11 million. That is usually our annual allotment that comes into Iowa. It's formula-based, vehicle over road miles, population. And so as long as we have conforming laws and we're able to abide by requirements and criteria, those are the awards we get. We have a pretty heavy law enforcement exposure with our projects. I don't know the exact percentage. I think it's less than a third, maybe 30% of our funding is going out to law enforcement across the state. That includes state law enforcement, county, city, and from recent discussions with Allison and Chief McCluskey at Waukee, we did a little bit of audit. 16 of the Des Moines Metro law enforcement agencies already are awarded grant funding through the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. How they utilize that is all based on a proposal and application for funding. We put together an agreement, and then we just follow through and make sure those terms are met, and productivity and effectiveness is met. Each year we'll conduct risk assessments. Are the grant applicants able to expend the money? How they're proposing to spend that? Are they in high crash areas of the state? We try to have some exposure throughout the state, so we don't concentrate those on maybe say the top 10. If we did, the top 10 counties or jurisdictions that it would always be in, we know that drivers travel. So they're not always just traveling within their home county or jurisdiction. They're traveling other places, and many of them to the Des Moines area. So 16 out of, I think it was 21 law enforcement agencies, Des Moines MPO, have some of that funding. Just some examples of our community partners, because we're also involved in education, awareness, engagement opportunities. Mothers Against Drunk Driving been a great program for us. They weren't really in Iowa until a couple of years ago. We got a couple of great partners to work with. Very active, very passionate about what they do. Street Collective, we worked with Street Collective now for a couple of years on bicycle education opportunities. Iowa Restaurant Association, and so that'd be Serve Safe, alcohol beverage server training. Blank Children's Hospital with child passenger safety, and some other activities there. So just examples. Some of our media campaigns, and so we have a pretty heavy emphasis on that. Maybe 1.5 or less $1 million of our funding is going to media and awareness campaigns, both organic with somebody in my office that manages that, but also with paid social media with the vendor that we work with, to try to find really the most effective messaging that's going to reach the target demographics. We want to try to influence the best we can. It's difficult. It's challenging. Addressing driver behavior, trying to change behavior is difficult. We also fund research through the University of Iowa, Iowa State University. We've got some great partners there because a lot of our programs, all of them, really need to be based on that research and data and facts for effectiveness. Our behavioral campaigns, at least the ones through the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. It's been a few years now, so we're revisiting market research that we conducted in 2023, stakeholder interviews, focus groups, concept development, validations, and really the findings have been that unsafe driving behaviors, they're annoying for when others are doing it, but the drivers themselves rationalize those behaviors. They think they're good drivers. They think they're good at being risky. They think they can manage being impaired. They think they can manage being distracted. They think they're very good speeders, but others aren't. And so this is the audience. These are the people that we're trying to influence. And it's very difficult. And so can't maybe see them as well. I put a couple of links on this, so I don't know, Allison, if the slides are going to be shared. A couple of good links there. Drive Smart Iowa is really our external site that we use. A lot of our campaign materials all housed on that, based on this research. It's all taxpayer funded, so anybody can use that, those campaigns as much as they want. Traffic Safety Marking is the NHTSA site that has a lot of other campaigns that can be reused. Like I said, they're public. And then the Iowa DOT has some traveler series out there. I don't know if anybody's seen theirs. There's some little short animated videos, and these are more focused on, really how to use the roadway, how to use roundabouts, how to act for move over, and things like that. So there's some good resources out there that we may not have to recreate them. We may not have to, expend our funding for those things because they're there. They can be reused as much as possible. Just some examples of some of the things that we heard from these drivers. So I decided, even if I felt a little fuzzy in the eyeballs, I was going to drive. Felt like it was a bit of a gamble, but the safest option. Obviously, that's not. But these are some of the messages that we heard over and over again, and we tried to put that into this. No one's a good drunk driver. Nobody's a good unsafe driver. Nobody's a good distracted driver campaign. So some of the things that we heard from our campaign research, they don't want the government telling them what they shouldn't do. So we have to work with that. They don't want to tell people. They don't want people telling them you're a bad driver. Speeding is bad. Distracted is bad. We need to message that in a way that it'll maybe be received. And this was received the best from our validation. Ooh. Just another one. I'm a professional distracted driver. Always have to take care of something when I'm driving. I have some techniques to mitigate the risk. Obviously, not a good idea. This is before the hands-free law. It should be pretty clear to everybody that distracted driving is a problem. They shouldn't do it. Awareness, that's all out the window. Everybody's aware. And so we really appreciate that the law is there. There are consequences to risky behavior, and we don't want the consequence to be a crash, injuring, killing somebody else or the driver themselves. And so with some data analysis that we work very closely with the Iowa State University's Institute for Transportation. I can't see it. And one of the things that we work with, they have Iowa Traffic Safety Data Services. So this is available to anybody throughout the state. Hey, we're having a problem in our jurisdiction. Can you look at the data and tell us, where it is, what it is, and give us some feedback and some guidance on where we should, focus our resources. And so that's available to anybody. That link leads you to a request for data services through Iowa State University's Institute for Transportation. The Iowa DOT, they have some Iowa DOT safety dashboard. This is fed by the Iowa Crash Analysis Tool. When I was looking at the safety action plan, I know that the ICAT, the Iowa Crash Analysis Tool, was referenced quite a little bit. And so working off of that, making it a little more user-friendly. We know this from ICAT. We have to filter, we have to get down to this or that. And sometimes it's not as user-friendly when you're not in it every day. And so the DOT safety dashboards are more user-friendly. There's a Moines NPO filter in there. So if you want to filter what's going on in your area, there is a filter for that in other NPO areas, as well as plenty of others. We work with Iowa Health and Human Services with the EMS data registry. So trauma centers, receive crash victims, they collect that data, and we want to make sure that data is accurate and robust as possible. EMS is dispatched, and then they start, how long does it take to go to a call, how long does it take to triage, back, advanced care, and things like that. So we work with them on that EMS data registry, which in turn feeds NEMSIS, National EMS Registry. The other Department of Management used to be Criminal Justice Planning, I believe, and they merged with the other Department of Management. But there's an adult court dashboard. So the enforcement data that's being collected by law enforcement is all in this adult court dashboard. It's in traffic safety. So we use all of these things to look at what's the amount of effort that's being placed in local jurisdictions. Can our funding boost that up to a level that would make it more effective? And with these law enforcement contacts, citations, OWIRS, anything that's on a state code right now, they file through the courts, it gets into the Justice Data Warehouse, and it's all available, and that's what's feeding the dashboard. We can look at the level of enforcement that's being conducted by all of our law enforcement agencies on state code right now. A project that we're working with them is try to capture at least some of the local ordinances and try to capture some of that and marry that into the Justice Data Warehouse also. We know that there's a lot of enforcement that's taking place out there that outside of state code. So those are some of our, basically just an overview of the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. And hope I didn't talk too fast, but I know that your time is precious. I don't want to go far past. Do you have any questions for me?
Please.
I'm curious your thoughts on both thoughts on mobile speed cameras, and then, and I know there's a process at DOT for approval, and what the Traffic Safety Bureau's role in some of that. We're trying to navigate and figure out. We've submitted a number of locations that we think there's a safety justification for, and we get denials without much explanation. So do you have?
I would say this broadly. I know that automated enforcement is an effective counter. And so that there's plenty of research that shows that. Now, as far as our involvement, we haven't been involved in that much. Commissioner of Public Safety is appointed by the governor, and as far as any kind of policies that we support, say we don't, we answer to the boss. And so, but automated enforcement is an effective countermeasure. I think my perspective on that is justifications on where those are placed and how long they're there. It does need to be crash justified. Are we going to lower crash? Are we going to save lives? Are we going to prevent injuries? And so I think there has to be a volume there. I don't know their process. We work with the people in the Department of Transportation that do that. We're not involved in those committees and approvals or anything like that at all. But I do believe where they are placed does need to be justified. And if a problem has been subdued or lowered, reviewing where that's at and maybe replacing automated enforcement somewhere else, I think is probably a good method. It's a little bit like hotspot enforcement. We go to a problem, hopefully we've lowered it, and we move on to where the next problem is, hopefully we lowered it, and at the end of it all, the aggregate has gone down. So, this perspective.
That's helpful. From a justification perspective, just like a question. I mean, you said crash justified. Are there preemptive locations from a justification perspective? For example, we have schools that are on busy roadways. There might not have been a lot of crashes, but speed is still a worry there.
Again, I don't know all of their criteria on where they're selecting and approving those. But if the goal is to reduce fatality and serious injury crashes, that's where my focus would be. And I understand that with work zones, school zones, that those are very good places to lower the risk. And so maybe that's a high risk network section of roadway. But when we're talking about the enforcement component of it all, I would focus, again, I'm removed on lowering crashes that are going to cause fatalities and serious injuries. Thank you.
Brett, thank you for being here. Been reading a bit about some of these communities across the country and states looking at autonomous vehicles, thinking about traffic safety. Hear about the average human gets in an accident, them driving once every 400,000 or 500,000 miles, but some of these autonomous vehicles are once every 6 million miles. Are you seeing, first of all, is your office doing anything relative to some of this autonomous future of that or anything in the state of Iowa? And do you see any activity in Iowa today or down the road?
No. So we haven't been involved. I think it's, at least at this point, I'm sure it's an infrastructure type of deal. And I know there needs to be redundancies in these autonomous vehicles also. It's not just the vehicle. There needs to be a network and redundancies in the vehicle and the network. So, the vehicle has these safety components to them, which I love. My vehicle has lane departure, speed assist, and all of those things. Love them. There needs to be redundancies. This is what I hear from our friends at the University of Iowa, Dr. McGehee, with autonomous vehicles. And so, are those vehicles mapped into a larger system for the redundancy? Are there other countermeasures that are out there? Not countermeasures, but safety features. So there's redundancy. That way, if the vehicle fails, there's something else that's going to make sure it stays on the road. I see the same things you do, that you take the human out of it and it's a lot safer. Even though there's been a lot of concerns about Waymos and this or that, doing whatever. Humans are doing far worse. And so I get it. But
you're not seeing activity in Iowa or a plan for activity in Iowa, as you know.
No, that'd probably be all with the Iowa Department of Transportation. I'm sure they're looking at the infrastructure and redundancies, and I'm not sure if they're making it into the crash data. I haven't heard much of anything making it into the crash data. Somebody probably doesn't want to admit that I was asleep and then the car was gone. My parents were in a friend's Tesla, and they drove in rural town, and they thought it was the greatest thing that he never touched the steering wheel. I really didn't think that. He was behind the wheel. He was awake. That's great. But we need to have those other redundancies in there to feel really good about it. I believe. Thank you. Anything else?
Thanks, Brett. We appreciate you being with us today. Thanks a lot for all your information. Next item on the agenda is the freight plan, and we're going to hear from Janet right now.
MDO staff has drafted the freight plan that is up for approval today. The freight plan focuses on how the freight system impacts central Iowa. This was built in development with freight stakeholders, and also is in development with freight working groups. We had 4 different meetings with them to go over the document and the contents of it. There are 5 chapters within this plan. The first one starts with an introduction showing about the history of freight planning with the FPO, a timeline of stakeholder engagement, and it also includes goals and the purpose of it. And then goes into the existing conditions. So mainly looks at trucks, rail, pipelines, and aviation. And so those are the 4 modes of freight within the FPO planning area. It also looks at freight generating facilities and also freight impediments within the FPO planning area. From there, the 3rd chapter talks about safety concerns, more specifically applied to truck, rail, pipelines. It then gets into planning considerations, so our freight trends and what to anticipate and look out for within the FPO planning area and central Iowa. So that includes topics of safety, the economy, automation and electrification of trucks, as well as future freight-related projects that will be happening in the region. And lastly, there's the implementation chapter, which is how the FPO is going to lead and support in the freight space. The main areas that we saw through engagement, the development of this plan is through analysis of rail crossings, truck routes, and truck parking. A full list of these action items can be found in the 5th chapter of the plan. There was a public comment period. It was open for 30 days. We didn't receive any feedback online. However, we did implement feedback that was provided for our working group session. And so that included updating some of our maps, including a section about manufacturing, and updating some language. Looking ahead, once the plan is adopted, the MPO will continue the freight efforts through engaging with freight stakeholders. So continuing to attend the Freight Advisory Council when invited, attending the Logistics Roundtable and the Deployment Partnership. It also includes creating a dashboard with freight-related data. So a lot of the data is located stagnant in the plan to be able to be accessible online through an interactive map, as well as crossing information, impediments, and routes. Then MPO staff will prioritize the implementation items that are mentioned in the 5th chapter. And lastly, we're going to utilize information within the freight plan to inform the next MPO long-range transportation plan updates. I'm happy to take any questions at this time. If not, staff is next level.
Questions for Janet? With that, move approval. Is there a second? Second. Okay, all those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the transportation capital improvement, and that will be Claire.
Good afternoon. The Transportation Capital Improvement Program is a summary of all the transportation related capital improvement projects going on throughout the region over the next 4 years. In the report, there are maps and a breakdown of all the projects. So, looking at the funding by project type and jurisdiction, I'm not going to break through all of these numbers here, but the total investment over the next 4 years will be $1.3 billion across the region. This is down from $1.7 billion in last year's report. Looking at the distribution of projects, most of the funding will be invested into streets,
followed by bridges and intersections. Fiscal year 2027 will see the highest investment, dropping in 2028 and rising through 2030. This is a map of all of the transportation related capital improvement projects, and there is an interactive version available online. We have overlaid all the projects onto our degree of transportation disadvantage map, which uses census data, summarizing associated characteristics that are transportation disadvantaged, like single-headed household and carless households. So in 2024, 32% of the region's population lived within these census tracts, and over the next 4 years, approximately 18% of their overall funding will be invested in these census tracts. This is down from 24% last year. Staff recommends approval. Are there any questions?
I'm curious, where we go from 1.7 to 1.4, I think you said billion, is that right?
3 billion.
Okay. Is that drop just because maybe the transportation jobs infrastructure dollars are being used up, or why the drop of this area is growing?
I can't say the reason why, but I noticed that some cities dropped, some cities are making the same.
Okay, we can't attribute it to anyone in particular.
I don't know.
Okay.
We wondered if it was because of the property tax bill that communities are feeling a little more pinch, but we don't have any data to back that up. It's just one point in time to see that there was a drop.
Any other questions?
Is there more of a story or explanation that on the slide that you just put up there? So 32% of the region's population lives in the transportation disadvantaged census tract. You said it was 24% of overall funding a year ago.
Yeah.
Would have been dedicated to that area. Now it's 18%. Is there more explanation or color commentary for why?
What I think is that a lot of them are in certain in certain jurisdictions, and some of those jurisdictions dropped in funding, and so that decreased the total percentage overall for those areas.
This is all just a culmination of all the city's individual CIPs.
We're just grabbing all that.
We're just grabbing all the information, reporting out what it is. So one city might have not been spending. We saw a drop of however many $1 million there that we've just discussed from 1.7 down to 1.3. So if that drop happened in the VJ area, that percentage changed.
Or if you had a major project, like for example, Southeast Connector getting completed during a stretch, that may account for both the drop in funding. Okay.
Yeah. We just always like to kind of report on this just to.
And some things come into a CIP as community-wide, right? So that can't necessarily be parceled out into each of the census tracts. And so some of the CIPs might say our GAP program is community-wide. And so it's very hard to say this is an exact dollar, but these are specifically 18% are invested on paper in those communities, things like that. So some things are just, transit is system-wide. So there might be certain things that happen in that area. Some things can't be parceled out though.
This is a voting item, so if there are no other questions, entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Second. Mr. Moines moves approval.
Second.
5 seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item is the 2080 agreement. Just when you thought it couldn't get any more exciting. Here we go.
All right. Buckle up, everyone. Some background on this. We've been working on the 2080 bylaws review for the last several months. This is follow up to some feedback we received from a few different ways. We had our certification review last year. USDOT pointed out a few things that might be out of date in our 2080 and bylaws and suggested to do this. We also knew that there was a few things that we wanted to catch up on from the governance assessment and some of the work that we did more on a strategic level back in 2024 with CAPSOLs. Nothing that was immediate that we needed to do, but now it was time that, okay, it's worth digging into this a little bit. So there was a review committee appointed. You can see who was up there on the screen. They met a handful of times from May and June, really just to go through the 20D and bylaws. The way we went about this as staff and legal, we went through first and identified here are some things we think could be changed or updated, what have you. And we broke those into 3 different tiers of review. The first tier was just grammatical changes, updating terms, very, very minimal type of work there. Things that didn't impact policy, just cleaned up language. Tier 2 were things that were a little more structural. So maybe we should move this from the bylaws to the 2080 or vice versa, or let's reorganize the documents a little bit. They look like big changes if you look at a red line version of a lot of stuff going on, but they didn't really change the intent. They didn't change policy or anything like that. Tier 3, those were the big things. Those were here we're proposing some stuff that probably deserve a lot of attention, and that's what we're here to talk about today. When we went through this with the review committee, when we outlined here's kind of the universe of things we're talking about. Tier 1 and 2, they kind of, yep, this all looks good. That was maybe the first. The rest of our time was really focused on those tier 3 items. So I'll walk through these, and I know in the agenda packet you've got a couple different versions. You got a red line version, a cleaned up version. I'm not going to go through this word by word. Right today, we're just discussing it and kind of outlining it. We'll come back next month and ask for approval on these items. So the tier 1 recommendations, like I said, these were just cleaning up language. A few of those examples, there's census terminology that was just out of date that we updated. There was a few things in there about the source of data that we use right now. The 2080 says that we will use the census, the decennial census or the latest census update. Well, there's a question of what does that mean by the latest census update? What we've been using for the last 10 years or so has been the decennial, like the official census estimate that comes out every year. We wanted to make sure that everyone's okay with that, and that everyone has been okay with that. We wanted to document. So that's an example of that change. There was a lot of references to that, so that was kind of a common change throughout there. There were some things in there that said the executive committee will meet monthly. They don't meet monthly. They meet 10 months out of the year. So just making little changes like that just to keep. Tier 2, like I said, this was kind of restructuring a few things here. There were some references, and this is both the 2080 and bylaws, where the documents just refer to the MPO as kind of a blanket statement, when really they're referring to the policy committee. Instead of saying the MPO will take action or make an approval, they really mean the policy committee. So making those kind of adjustments there. Some changes on advisory committee members. There's just kind of a laundry list of who all can be advisory members, and just making that a little more clear and concise. The one thing that I will point out here is the very bottom one, the open meeting language. We reframed that a little bit to try to make it a little more clear. This was something that the executive committee pointed out that probably needed to have a little more work done to it. So when we presented this to the executive committee, like I said, we really wanted to make sure that we're abiding by open meetings and open records laws. So we went back and revamped that a little bit and really made changes to 2 different sections. And I'm showing this to you here in the presentation. I didn't have time to print these off and get them before you, and I don't want to confuse things too much. But changed up Article 4, which really is the part that talks about how meetings will operate. Basically says it will operate through open meetings or, in compliance with open meetings. And then we've got another section that talks about creating committees. So walking through those just individually here, the part that talks about about meetings. Before it was kind of a convoluted list of things. We tried to simplify that and just said any meetings of policy, exec tech, as well as any established committees, subcommittees, and so forth, will abide by open meetings laws. So just make it very clear cut. The other section, talking about committees, we broke this into 2 different areas. We do want feedback on this. So this section 2 here basically says the MPO shall establish committees or subcommittees, advisory committees, and whatnot, with the purpose of basically providing feedback and recommendations for policy. So provide guidance, feedback, recommendations to the policy committee or staff. They will abide by open meetings laws. So when those committees meet, the funding subcommittee meets, that's an open meeting. And we contrast that with another section here about more stakeholder engagement type of meetings. So if we have a public open house, that's not a meeting per open meetings laws. We don't have to keep minutes. There's no attendance. There's no, that kind of thing. We also, and this is where we want some feedback. A lot of our roundtables serve as this purpose too. They are open to whomever. There's no established list. It's kind of, we have one meeting, we might get 5 people. The next meeting, we get 30 people, and they might be different people. We make those open to everybody. So they are open meetings. But when it comes to posting them, doing all the administrative work behind the scenes, doing minutes and so forth, that's where we can get a little, where do they belong? So we just broke those out into those 2 sections. The first one will be, obviously, if there are subcommittees that serve that purpose of providing guidance, they will definitely comply with that. Not that these ones won't comply, but we just kind of treat them a little bit different. We'll pause there and see if there's any questions or feedback on that. Kind of muddle through that, Scott. You can.
Well, this was a point of contention for me, and I did do a little bit digging into the law. And roundtables and things do require open meeting notices, and obviously our public participation plan, we have a lot of information in there about trying to get engagement. But the way it was previously written, basically we weren't going to advertise this meeting, so how would the public even know that we're having a meeting, what it's about, and where to be able to participate? So I'm interested to see, we make corrections to the red line version.
Yeah, and I can send those out. And with that,
I would appreciate that. Yeah, I would appreciate that before the next meetings.
Yeah, we will do that. So then moving on to the tier 3, and again, these are the bigger substantive things. So working through these, I'll just kind of start at the top and work down the sheet there. Weighted voting was something that was discussed. Right now in our 2080 agreement, we really have kind of 2 ways voting can happen. Voting can happen just in our normal way we've been doing it today, where it's just simple majority, or we can do a weighted vote. Weighted vote would mean each community's population counts, it's weighted by the population. In anyone's recollection, it's never been used. So why do we have it? And that was kind of the question we put before that review committee. Do we want to keep weighted voting, but maybe make the makeup of this group, which is also population based, the more population you have, the more representatives you have, make that a little more simplified? Or do we want to take out the weighted vote, keep it the way it is as far as the committee makeup, or keep them both in there? And their recommendation was, let's remove the weighted vote. Let's just keep it simple. It's never been used. Take away the threat. Just do that. So that was the recommendation, and to keep population-based committee representation. There is language at the beginning of the 2080 that talks about the MPO can also get involved in other, I don't know if it says non-transportation, but essentially that's what it is, get involved with other non-transportation federally required projects. That has come up over the years as kind of a point of debate, and so that was discussed. And the group thought that because we have that decision matrix now where the group has a process by which we decide what we're going to be involved with and when, that it was safe to keep that in there. One comment from the executive committee was to actually reference that decision document. So we don't have language developed yet, but we can put something in there that keeps it kind of evergreen, but also makes reference to policies that determine what we get involved with. That language also, we think, could allow, if we do get involved with some sort of strategic funding swap, like we've talked about in our funding review, that language would also provide the cover to do that, because there is reference to some financial and fiscal related activities from the MPO. So no changes there. That's just something that we didn't do. I wanted to point that out. When we get into the bylaws, there was a part in the executive director's language that made a reference to the executive committee, or that I would have to consult the executive committee on any staff hiring or terminations. That's probably not the intent of the way it read was probably not the intent. It's probably more of hey, just give us a heads up on any changes after the fact, and everyone agreed with that. So the language has been clarified there. Sort of reference to what we just talked about with the open meetings discussion. We did try to clarify the different types of committee types. And because we have roundtables and subcommittees, what's the difference between these different ones? We probably went a little too far, and that's where it got muddled with the open meeting language. So we'll clarify that. And those distinctions can be made elsewhere in the public participation plan or something. It doesn't have to be in the bylaws. So that's something that needs to change on this slide here. And then the next two we'll talk a little bit more in depth about, which is structure for the executive committee and terms of officers and that sort of thing. Before I move on to that, are there any questions about the other items here in this tier 3? Okay. We had a discussion about the executive committee and talked about what its size, its purpose, its purview, and that sort of thing. We went through a SWOT analysis. Some of the feedback that we heard when we looked at this, and this reflects feedback that I've heard from meeting with you individually too. The size of the executive committee right now, it's an 11-person committee, which is a subcommittee of this 25-person full board. So it's a little under half the full board. There's good discussion there, but it's also quite large. And sometimes having the good discussion there means there's not as much discussion here. So that was one of the feedback. However, it also works well because the way it's created, you've got large cities, small cities, east side, west side, it's very balanced in terms of size. So that's also a good thing. Another thing we heard that was kind of a negative was oftentimes for those who participate, it would be very redundant to this meeting. So it's kind of the same agenda. It's 2 meetings. There's a little bit of that. So these were some of the factors that we were weighing as we went through this. The recommendation, or sorry, before I get to that, as we asked the review committee, what is your take on this sort of thing? They all agreed that the executive committee should be pretty high level. It doesn't need to be in the weeds doing the exact same thing that this group does. It can be a little more setting the direction and strategy, more of an advisory role rather than a voting role. And that's something we've changed informally over the last few years, where the executive committee doesn't take votes. They don't formally recommend things. They just have a discussion, they'll provide feedback. All the votes happen here. So we can take this opportunity to codify that in our bylaws. And so that kind of gets into what the policy executive committee is not. It's not a decision-making group. It's not a gatekeeper group. They can't say, no, don't take that policy. Everything will go through that group and come to here eventually. And so in terms of the makeup and the size, they did like keeping some of the guardrails as far as sub areas to make sure it's balanced. It has some sort of size, mixed in there. All that to say, the recommendation that came through that review committee was to reduce the size of the executive committee down to 7 people. So 3 officers and then 4, you could call them at large, but those at large could still be representative of, east side, west side, big city, small city, what have you. That the details on that of east side, whatever the sub areas would look like, wouldn't necessarily have to be put into the bylaws. The idea was let's put them in the work program. The work program's updated every year. That would be an opportunity to say, yep, this is working, or we want to make a tweak without having to go back and formally update the bylaws. You can see there on the screen what our initial thoughts were for that 7. Again, you'd have 3 officers. Those officers could be from anywhere. And then in addition to that, you'd have 1 from Moines. You'd have 1 from some of the larger sub areas or larger communities that we have a vote, more of a west side and more of an east side related group. One other thing that was kind of weighing into this right now, like I said, we've got 11-person executive committee. The makeup of that is a community over 50,000, as well as Polk County automatically get a seat at the executive committee, with Des Moines getting 2. And then the other 15 members are broken up into 1 of 3 sub areas. Each sub area gets 2, so that makes up the 11. We're going to have a situation in a few years where Urbandale is going to be over 50,000. And so then that's a 12-person executive committee. It kind of throws off the sub areas. That was also part of the meeting. When we presented this to the executive committee, they thought that's creating a solution in search of a problem, that the 11-person committee works fine, and to keep it that way. So that was their feedback. So again, pointing out that Urbandale situation, but there are options we could take if we wanted to accommodate that and keep it at 11 or keep it at 12, whatever we want to do. I just wanted to point that out. So I don't know if there's feedback from this group yet about size before we move on, or about the executive committee. I've got some other thoughts about officer selection and that sort of thing, but just in terms of the executive committee itself, size, purpose, any feedback here?
Maybe clarifying question. Is Warren County, like Polk County is on this? Is Warren County on this?
Warren County is on the executive or on the policy committee. They're not guaranteed a seat on the executive committee like Polk County is, but they are in one of the sub areas that could.
I guess that's what I was,
Yeah.
was which sub area?
Yeah, they belong to the southwest sub area. Some of the sub area names are a little arbitrary, but yeah. I just think that are inactive.
I'm still supporting of leaving it the way it is. Obviously, when we went through this reorganization many years ago, there was a reason why we were looking at geography and it spread across small, medium, large communities.
Yeah.
I don't think it has been unwieldy, if you will. And if anything, it's more eyes vetting what we are bringing forward to policy to say, hey, staff, we have questions here. These need to be answered so that time for this meeting is much more productive. Have all that information. It's not, okay, I got to search for an answer. I answer that next one.
Can I?
Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay. So I understand the comment and the pushback in terms of, solution looking for a problem. However, I would highlight that a lot of the conversation around the executive committee came down to we don't want it to be a second meeting of the policy group, right? The policy committee is the decision-making body. And having a majority of the members, which in a couple of years, right, will be at 12. And it's not a one-time decision point. In 7 or so years, it's feasible Waukee might be at that same decision point, or another city. And so having now guaranteed membership over 50,000, unlimited, right, in terms of growth into the future, feels like it will become unwieldy. Secondarily, that conversation around not wanting the executive committee to be the same conversation or the same meeting all over again. It is a second meeting for executive committee members to attend, a second meeting for staff to prepare for. If it is the same conversation that is happening, we want to be really thoughtful about that, because part of the issue that we've had over the last few years is that a lot of questions get asked at exec committee, and then we get to policy and they're not asked because they've already been asked. And so it seems like we're not discussing it, whereas it's already been discussed. That's not really the point. And so this was sort of an attempt to come to a discussion around, should this be a slightly different structure focused on just some large picture items to help staff with direction in advance of how to present or what all needed to be considered as we moved forward. So I understand the comments, but I just want people to keep in mind that this is not a one point decision. We don't have to make changes today, but we're going to continue to add population across a number of cities, and we will continue to kind of run into this situation as we move forward as well. So that was sort of the intent behind it. Whether we do anything in terms of changing structure or not, that had been a large part of the conversation.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I mean, I would say as someone who's not on executive committee, I would have a preference for a smaller executive committee. It feels to me, this my time on policy, that the executive committee folks who've been part of the discussion, it just seems that there's not a lot of interest in broader discussion and repeating questions, and maybe I should just be more aggressive about it at times, but I have felt that the discussion here matters less because it's just the way I felt sitting in this room. And I think that would change with a smaller executive committee and a narrower focus. But maybe it's my fault for the way I am not sort of pushing as much or asking as much. And that could be the way I participated as an at-large member and not an executive committee member. But I feel like the discussion would be different if there were more of us who were not on executive. That's just kind of how I've always kind of felt that things feel pretty baked in by the time they get here after executive. And maybe, like I said, maybe that's me not doing the job in the right way, but that's part of how it feels for my.
I think those are good points, and I think Courtney makes a lot of good points. I did support keeping the exec as it currently is structured. But I think in the past it has been done, right? But I think if we're intentional in how we do exec going forward and not being gatekeepers and just being a little bit more strategic in how we approach it, I think we can kind of eliminate that, because Courtney's right. There have been many times where it's basically just the same meeting a second time, and that is not a real good use of our time. So I support keeping the exec the way it is for many of the reasons that Len mentioned. And I mean, we have good coverage. It doesn't seem to be unwieldy to me at this point. I think again, it's just being intentional in how we do it. And I guess my point or my question to you, Dylan, is, I mean, we set this what seemingly kind of arbitrary number of 50,000. Does it have to be 50,000, or can we raise that to 75,000?
Yeah, it could be adjusted. When we updated this last time, kind of to what Len was saying earlier, in 2018 we changed, was the last big change. And we had a policy committee. For those of you who weren't here, it was like a 50-person policy. So we shrunk it down by almost half. Right. And the compromise was we'll make exec a little bit bigger. It was 7-person. It was similar to what we're proposing to go back to. So we shrunk policy, we expanded executive committee. We're not saying change anything with policy, but that adjustment back to executive committee is what we're talking about.
I think in the past,
but yeah, we could change.
Past exec has been kind of decision makers, and then it was just kind of presented to policy as this is what exec came up with. And I think we've kind of shifted from that, but I think we can be even more intentional with that going forward. So,
but yeah, to your point, there's nothing special about 50,000. At the time when this was 2010, that seemed like a nice number that a few communities hit, but not everyone. And that's not feasible.
I would just chime in and say that going to a different kind of arrangement, being one of the smaller communities in the West, I always feel that having a seat at the table is very important. My concern would be that if Oak City, and I don't know what the other communities were, Ankeny, so forth and so on, it became one representative from all those communities. Well, then all of those communities would have to get together in some way anyway to talk about what the issues were. So it's almost easier to have representatives still coming to the executive committee. Yeah.
That's good feedback. And as we go through this, you'll see some other things that might accommodate or be a compromise to keeping the size, but also scaling back executives. I can continue unless there's other questions on this. Officer selection was another thing we talked about related to all of this. The current officers, the way that the process currently works is we'll have municipal or county elections in November. New people take over in January. The MPO, we need to find out who those new people are, so they have to give us their appointments by the end of January. We select officers in February, as well as executive committee members. They take office in March. What has happened over the last couple of times, especially with the vice chair position, is we might have a vice chair that doesn't run for re-election or isn't re-elected, and then we have a gap from the time their term ends at the end of December until the new officer terms start in March. So what we're suggesting is in November, at the November MPO meeting, that's the time we will make all these decisions of who the officers will be, as well as the executive committee for the next year. And that way there's no drop off, there's no gap between the end of the calendar year and the start of the new terms when municipal terms or county terms start. The other thing with that is having a preference that Vice chair is basically treated as a chair-elect. So when you pick a vice chair, the expectation is that they will, when the current chair's term is over, that they will inherit that position. Now, that's not set in stone. If someone decides they really don't want to do it or they're not performing a good job, there's an out for that. But all things being equal, that would be the expectation of that position. That way we just have a better chain of succession in terms of leadership from the board. If that makes sense. Any thoughts there?
How long are the officer terms?
The chair can serve for up to 2 one-year terms. The other ones don't have any set time limit, but typically after the chair, the vice chair becomes chair.
I mean, I guess there feels like a consequence doing this immediately after November. For the most part, that would, I think, eliminate newly elected folks because
Right.
It's
They wouldn't have gone through their city process yet to be chosen.
right. And it eliminates opportunities for newly elected folks to be there, where it seems like the issue is we're trying to avoid a continuity issue, which we could do more simply. I mean, I think everyone is on a 4-year term, right? So the idea would be let's avoid a vice chair that is
Right.
that is going to be up for election before they become chair. And that I'd rather do it that way than eliminate adding someone who may have run on these issues and we're picking it. You're going to make it hard for them to try and come in and say, hey, I'd like to be on MPO as one of my committees.
Yes. And so the 2 things to that. One is it does in the bylaws, there is language to what you're saying, try to find someone who's kind of at the beginning of their term so they don't have that change. The other piece about newly elected people, that was a consideration. The thought process though is, would you want someone who's brand new, has never been on the MPO to come in and be an officer for the MPO or be on the executive committee? You probably want someone who's been around a little bit.
Okay. This is only officer, not selection.
Correct. The city can still put whoever they want on.
Sorry, I was maybe miss.
Yeah, we're just talking officers and execs. Yep. And so that would be for officers. Executive committee process would be similar. Right now, the way the sub areas are, in the bylaws, it basically says that the mayors of those sub areas of the county, the chair and supervisors, kind of huddle up and get together and just let us know who they picked. And they have to do so by mid-February. We don't always have, there's not transparency to that process. We'll might get an email from one mayor saying, hey, it's going to be these people. I have no idea if they actually met with their peers and select, how that selection went. The solution that we have here is at that November meeting when the officers are picked, we'll just take a 5-minute recess or whatever. Those sub areas get together and they report out to the whole group of who they've chosen. That way it's transparent. We know what meeting it's going to happen at. We have it done by that November date. So then it just can be a little more efficient. It might not be the mayors that do it because it might not be a mayor that's the city's representative. If the mayor wants to come and be part of that discussion, they're always welcome to come. But that's kind of the thought process we have here to help mitigate that issue. That sound okay? Frequency of, we started talking about this with frequency of the executive committee, but as you'll see, we talked about frequency of all of our committees. Kind of to this point of not having it be a repeat of policy. One solution was just have the executive committee meet less frequently. And this led down a rabbit hole a little bit of how do we structure our 3 main committees. And if you can read this up here on the screen, starting with July, what we're proposing then is that the tech and the tech and the policy committee would meet the 4 months of August, September, October, November. Take off December and January, which are typically lighter months, holiday breaks and so forth. Come back February, March, April, May, and then take off June and July. Again, summer breaks, usually lighter schedule. So we go from our current process of meeting 10 months a year to 8 months. We kind of have a spring session and a fall session, essentially, and a summer break and winter break to put you back in school. The executive committee would meet twice during each of those sessions. And the thinking here is that they would meet, let's say in August, they get a preview of the big things that are happening that will happen in September. So that gives kind of a 2-month lead to give direction, set us down a course. That stuff would happen in September, let's say. Then they meet again in October, looking ahead to the big actions that will happen in November, and repeat that. And it just falls nicely that the big things we work on are kind of staged that way. Does that meeting cadence kind of make sense? And the rhyme and reason behind that makes sense? Would you welcome that change? Try to focus your attention a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it kind of underscores the points that we were talking about earlier, that back then it's not doing a second meeting every time each month, and it can be a little bit more strategic because you're only meeting, basically quarterly.
This gives you what you want out of executive.
I think it would, yeah.
And the other piece we discussed was obviously the potential of having a special meeting. Something comes up, you gotta get approval for something, or obviously another special meeting could be scheduled.
Yes, we always have the right to call you together, whether it's virtual or whatever, for something emergency nature. We can do that. And then with a lot of our other committees and subcommittees we go for, we're kind of staggering them throughout this as well to also fit this. That sounds good. This doesn't really fit into the bylaws and the 20D necessarily. There's nothing that we meet at a certain schedule, but while we're having this conversation, it seems like a timely thing to bring up and run past you. Okay. The final thing from a 20D bylaws kind of standpoint, again, it could affect the bylaws and the actual documents, is adding clarity to the actual names of the groups, especially the policy committee. As we talked about, like I said, it references the MPO. Really, they're talking about the MPO policy committee a lot of times. But this is something we've heard from others. Is the policy, does there need to be a better name than the policy committee? Should it be called the MPO board or the planning, Metropolitan Planning Board or something like that? The thinking being from the review committee is policy committee kind of implies that there's something else above it. When really you are it. You're the final decision maker, and should a name better reflect that position in the hierarchy of your organization? So there's a few different names up there. Also, technical committee, maybe that works. Maybe it needs to be changed too. But there's different names up there. There was no strong recommendations one way or another on which name it should be, but we wanted to start the conversation. If you're open to that, we can come back with some suggestions. And if you have a preference, let us know, and we can continue to workshop this. I'll just say that staff really got thinking about this when we encountered the policy committee for the Dallas MPO. They called it the Regional Transportation Council. And it was just so simple and straightforward. You knew regionally, you knew about transportation, you knew they were decision makers. And we just like the clarity that gave for when you're in a conversation with the constituent. Oh, I serve on the MPO. What is an MPO? Whereas if you say, I serve on the Regional Transportation Council, you have some idea what you're talking about. And so whether it's that or something different, the idea that to bring clarity to role.
I like it. I encourage further along those lines. Yeah.
I'll second that. I came in and I was like, you're gonna be a policy committee. Okay. Other committee.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll continue to look at that. That's what we have here for this agenda item. I think we went through all those different, all those different pieces. The next step, we'll bring this forward in September with an option to take vote. Once the MPO takes a vote, the 20D especially does require approval by 3/4 of the member communities themselves. So that's something to keep in mind. We'll kind of work through that and help you make sure those get on agendas and so forth if these changes do get made here in the next couple of months. But if there's any questions in the meantime, if you look through the documents, you want more information, just please let us know and we can make sure we get you that so you're prepared next time. Thank you for bringing up this fun bureaucratic conversation, which I know Mike loves.
Well, Well, you have the floor. Why don't you give us your director's report?
Okay, I'll try to go
For the fence.
go through this somewhat quickly because I know we're past 5. Again, just try to touch on some of the things we've been doing as they affect our strategic plan here. A couple notes here. One, I went through and met with about half of you doing one-on-ones. Summer is a little hard to get a hold of people, so if you want to have those meetings, feel free to reach out. I'll be sending out an email to schedule those too. Apologize for the mess when you came in. We're getting carpet next week. So the office will be closed. We will be working remote. I don't think there's any meetings that any of you would be affected by anyway. But just be aware of that. If you happen to stop by the office, there's going to be workers in here putting in carpet. And we're going to be working remotely.
Nice to have air conditioning today.
Yeah, we got air conditioning last few days, so we luckily got it turned back on just in time for you all. The auditor is doing work. They have asked for the names of who's on the committee, and they said they're going to randomly call a couple. So just a heads up, if you're one of the lucky ones that gets a call from Corpus Native, that's what that is. So be prepared. Strategic planning framework item here on the regional plan and federal excellence. The big thing here is that we've gone through our solicitation for projects. We got 23 project applications submitted. That's 20 SDBG, 3 TAP or set aside applications. Meetings have been scheduled for, I don't remember the exact dates, but 7th and 8th of October to hear presentations from the communities. The tool that has been developed worked really well. We're seeing the types of things we want to see here. So over the next couple of months here, you're going to see a lot more of this, public meetings, the committee getting together and deliberating and so forth. So that's all happening. Next month, you should see an active transportation plan coming for you as well. Enhanced partnerships on the table before you is a annual report. It's hot off the presses, so take a look at that. We had our data bike out in the field over the last few months. So Colleen Kane, who's a Drake student, now she's at Iowa State, or will be starting at Iowa State next week. So thanks to her for her time in doing that. Also, just a quick legislative update. The current transportation bill expires at the end of September. It's not going to be a bill before the end of September that will replace it. There has been a continuing resolution passed by the Senate. It's expected the House will do the same. That will take it out to December. So we're going to be in this phase of continuing resolutions probably for a while until the new Congress comes in, and maybe next spring, summer, they will pass a actual transportation bill. So just a heads up on that. Finally, in terms of purpose-driven innovation, there's been a lot of work going on around the Future 435. There's been stakeholder meetings over the last couple of weeks. There's another one next week. So Gunner's been at those. If you have questions on what you've heard, what's been going on there, you can ask him. There's also been some work going on around the Grimes line, meeting set up for the next couple of months to bring those communities together to discuss the latest and greatest what's going on there. We're working on a number of RFPs to get out for the Safe Streets for All and kind of related funding things. So those will be hitting the streets here soon. We're having a lot of meetings with industry consultants. So that should all be coming forward to the board at some point once we hopefully get a grant agreement with the federal government to actually extend those funds. A couple other things I wanted to point out. One, I mentioned Colleen, our one intern. We also have Claire Hamilton, who did the TCI community for you. She's also starting back to school next week, but she's going to be continuing with us part-time through the through the fall. So want to acknowledge her work, but she's not going anywhere just yet. There are some materials on the back table about safety. So there's stickers and slap bracelets and stuff like that. Feel free to take it back to your city hall, put it out there, spread the word for all of that. And I think that wraps up what I had to say, unless there's anything else from staff, if you want to roll into other items. But
any question about that? That's the 435. Is there some Iowa bill? Is there some sort of timeline that it would expire? We have to worry about that's not passing something soon enough.
No, the state bill basically says until there's a alternative available, that is what they passed is the way to keep. There's speed exemption until something else happens. I don't think there's any sort of timeline on that.
Okay, Any other business to come before us? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Our next meeting is Thursday, September 17th at 4 p.m.
I'll move Pleasant Hill.
Right. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourned. Thank you.